Good morning. Happy St. Patrick's Day. My name is Nick Wu. I am Solutions Director at Iconos. And really for those of you just getting to know us, Iconos was formed to help companies transform their analytics teams, their solutions, and their processes into integrated, scalable, and impactful functions in the business. We also created the AlignAI Academy within Iconos from what we saw serving customers, really to address the skill set gaps we're seeing at companies of all sizes and industries. Welcome, everybody. We're so happy to have you join. I am joined by Wesley Rhodes and Noelle Silver, and then my colleague, Reagan Avon, will be monitoring the Q&A from the audience as well. Good afternoon, Reagan. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, super excited. This is meant to be very interactive. So as you have questions, throw them in the Q&A and in the chat, and I'll just interrupt the conversation and throw the question in there, and we'll make that live. So, please throw your questions in. That's the point of attending these things live.
Yeah, and another thing I like to do on these events is if you'd like to collaborate with anybody on here, please drop your LinkedIn profile in the chat as well. Like, part of this is all about moving the whole industry forward. So if we can connect and form new connections from this event, that's a success in our eyes too. So as mentioned, I am joined by Wesley Rhodes and Noelle Silver. Wesley, you want to give yourself a chance to introduce yourself? Welcome.
Well, thanks a bunch. I'm the Vice President of Technology Transformation and Research and Development at Kroger. So our job is just to figure out new and different ways to do things that cost less, do things differently, give our customers a great new experience.
And would you mind speaking to something unique or a solution that you saw or implemented recently, just to help folks understand the type of work that you're working on?
We do a lot of really good stuff that's kind of fun. I think one that would I think everybody would enjoy is everyone hates to spend way too much time at the checkout. So one of the things that we did is to have a device that looks at how many people are coming in and how they're shopping. Then it calculates how many people are going to show up at the cash register at what time, and it dispatches cashiers, there to ensure that we have the right amount at the right time to get everybody out quickly. Things that we're working on is to help people to get out even faster by doing it in a cashierless way. So we have smart carts and other technologies to get them out, and we were the ones that helped create that scan and walk out kind of a technology. So we're all into getting in, get your product, and get out quickly. So we're just focusing on all those kind of neat things.
It's fascinating.
I love scan and pay. You guys are awesome with that. I'm always the advocate in this grocery store. I'm like, see what you could do?
Yeah.
And then I walk out.
It gets me not standing in line. I hate it.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, and it's these little things, right? Like contextual innovation is, we don't realize it until you fix it. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is, and then once it's fixed, of course, we start complaining about other things, but it's such, oh my God, I love it. I love, especially grocery shopping, which is where we lose a lot of our lives.
Yes.
Certainly.
So really cool. Nice to meet you. That's awesome.
Yeah, Noelle, would you mind introducing yourself as well?
Sure. Yes. I am IBM's newest AI executive. I work for IBM Consulting, which is newly branded. It used to be called GBS. And what I do, and really my kind of reason that I'm here, my journey into innovation, analytics, AI specifically, started at Amazon Alexa. I was employee 10 on Alexa. So was part of a product, kind of all the things we do, right? When we started, nobody really knows what it's going to do or how well it's going to perform. This one ended up taking a little bit. So I took up the product from about 6,000, actually a 1,000 beta testers, about 6 million users. And then I grew it, I think, we like 400 times that growth. But I deployed 4 different language models. And really the reason I did it, or the reason I get excited about it, is because I operationalized something that prior to that, we had never really operationalized before, right? We thought we'd have maybe 100,000 users. We ended up with 100 million users, and that changes everything. So now I'm really passionate about that. But the other thing I'm passionate about, which I got to do at Microsoft, and then after Alexa, I went to Microsoft and productized the AI there known as cognitive services. And what I learned there was really all about like, oh my goodness, what, there aren't enough data scientists to do the work that we need to do. So how are we going to create more of us? And we did that by using AI to help build more AI. But with that comes that age-old question, like, we could clone dinosaurs, but should we? Right? So ethics and responsible AI became a very big part of kind of my mission in the world. So now that's what I do. I operationalize data science, and then I make sure we don't, build Skynet at the same time.
Me personally, I'm just really thrilled to have a face to Alexa.
Yeah, right.
It's
Yeah,
just, now
only
I
the
know.
good stuff though. If it's bad or doesn't answer your questions, like that was the other person on the team.
Now I know who I'm talking to. This is great.
That's right. Well, I'll give you a fun fact. If you go to Alexa and you say, Alexa, open mindfulness, that's mine. I built that. And I have over 1 million unique users of the applications that I've written. So yeah, it's cool. I never thought I'd be a dev in that way, right? And have users I have to care about. But here I am. So that's really cool. Yeah. So anytime, if it's good news, come to my way. If it's complaints, go to like complaints@amazon.com.
Wonderful. Change host. No. So that's very fascinating. Sorry, I was just on the side working to make Reagan a co-host as well. But thank you both, and especially Noelle, for jumping in at the last moment this morning. You're such a huge superhero to me. So thank you very, very much for joining, and Wesley as well. Let's have a fantastic conversation. And to kick it off, I wanted to talk to you both about Pilot Purgatory as a concept. So we use the title, really, it's a bit punchy inherently, but it's something that we so commonly see at organizations where their teams are constantly piloting AI and analytic solutions for the business. And maybe it's successful in pockets, but so often we see teams not getting really past that phase to scale across departments and across the organization. So today, let's discuss our own experiences with this. Wesley or Noelle, opening up to either of you, is Pilot Purgatory or pilot and being stuck in that phase as a concept something that you and your teams have discussed before, or something you ran into personally at an organization? I'm curious what you're thinking of that.
Well, I'm sure we both have run into it in our organizations, but I just kind of put them down into one of two reasons. Either they didn't do good enough on the requirements, so it wasn't broad enough, it wasn't good enough to really do the bill to get a broad enough acceptance. It either kind of fits into that loose category, or the people that are required to sign off on it are too risk averse to let it go. And I've really found a lot of that, to be quite honest with you, because they're afraid of some of the downstream ramifications. Does it replace a job? If you have unions and so forth in an environment, then that tends to be a big fear. What happens if I let it loose in the world? Because there's still a lot of terrible perceptions about AI, because it's somehow a four-legged animal that then rampage and ravages the world. All of a sudden, when you're ready to, they were very enthusiastic at one point, but then now they're ready to go put it out there. They have all these questions. If they have teenage children at home, some of them are probably posed by the children, like, oh my goodness, do you know what this thing could do? Or they have great ideas of what it could do that scares the adult to death. But they start thinking about things in a somewhat linear way, like, oh my gosh, let me think through the risks that I now are thinking about. Like, what if people are offended? Oh my goodness, what if wow, my goodness, I remember that Microsoft thing when it did all this other stuff that was kind of bad. Ooh,
What if we hit the
you
Wall
have to,
Street Journal?
yeah, that's right. I don't want to be on that paper. There's always an element of risk that you have to take when you're going to be first mover, when you're going to be getting any kind of advantage. If you're in the stock market, there's risk. If you're going to get some reward, there's risk. Applications that you've had in the past are still risky because they have bugs and they don't operate and as intended. There's impact to customers. At some point in time, you've got to be comfortable enough with the technology that you move forward. And with AI, I think it's out there enough that one should feel comfortable, but then you start hearing about the responsible ethics that Noelle was just bringing up. and you think that maybe I didn't do well enough on the training of it, but you know what? A lot of this is because I'm just not so familiar with how all this stuff works. And I'm the one that's got to let it loose on society. So in my mind, it's one of these two basic piles that it goes into. And I think we just do have to get over all that. And I think it starts with educating the executives on what it is, what's its use, the ROI that it has to give, and putting some rules and regulations in the environment to say, this is what it takes to get one into production, get that buy off so that the organization is taking the risk with you and you're not out there all alone. Imagine Noelle has got a lot of comments on this very same topic.
I'm like, I hope you all are taking notes because you just literally listed out the stuff that you have to do, which sounds easy. And you said it in 30 seconds, but is like very hard to do, right? So when you do a pilot, and I call all of mine now production pilots. And I do that so the first thing I do with pilots is I stop, or I try to recognize it. It's just like Alexa. Alexa was a pilot when we started it. It was this little weird thing. Nobody really liked it. Actually came on the heels of the Fire Phone, which was a bit of a disaster if anyone remembers it. Right. So we were already kind of going uphill, doing something new. The company was already a little bit like that didn't work out. And so, which often happens, right? When you have a pilot that fails, especially one that you invest like a lot in, the next few pilots are like, I don't know. So the first thing I think about is how do I, basically position this thing as a business, and I need to market and pitch this business. And so part of a business, and really the most important part when you're trying to get funding or get approval, which is exactly what you hit on, Wesley, is, being like data driven in your approach, right? Setting very clear KPIs. But then something that I personally do, like being able to identify not just the KPIs, but then being able to 10x those results, right? Being able to be like an overwhelming like direction of success, right? Where people are like, wait, you said we could probably reduce costs by like 10% and you cut it by 58%. Like it makes everyone stop, right? So I think that's to your point on the risk side. Like the only reason why people do more risky things is because the reward is like overly compelling. They're like, well, I mean, even if the bad thing happens, we're cutting costs by 58%, right? So I think being data driven in your approach with pilots is very important, but many of us are. The other side of it is that pilots, we've been doing pilots for a long time, like as an industry, right, in technology. And so they kind of do have a bad rap of like, oh, we'll try it out. The team could disintegrate. Like there's lots of reasons pilots fail. But when we say it, we never actually have the intention when we invest in building a pilot of using it in production. Like it's usually like a prototype. You build it, you show it, and then you throw it away. And I think over 20 years, at least in my experience, we've gotten a little bit tired of the idea of like, hey, I'm going to invest 50 grand in this thing that's never going to be a thing. And the funny thing about AI specifically is that if you are very specific in your scope and data driven in your results, you can actually build something that creates value for the company that can keep creating value. Like you don't have to get rid of it. You don't have to downplay it. You don't have to, right, decommission it. You don't have to put it in production. Like you're putting these AI models into production, even if they're in a, beta group, right? But it's still in production. Your customers are still using it. So I think it's a little bit of reframing what we use, like for the last 20 years, what we've seen pilots do, come and go and kind of burn a trail in the grass at the same time. And then what we can do with like applied AI. So the last part about that is today, my production pilots, I engage those, members of the organization that have the biggest pain. And I literally put them right next to the engineering team that's building the solution so that they're really, and sometimes I don't even need engineers because we can do a lot of these production pilots with low code, no code solutions. Right. So I think the world of pilots in general is actually changing, which is I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves because we're going to talk about this probably in some of our conversations today. But but the world of what you can do and call a pilot is actually evolving. And so I think part of that is just really, and that was the other thing you said, like messaging that to the executives and letting them know that this isn't your traditional, circa 2008 pilot, right? This is a different animal. And then the final thing you said that I have to touch on, excuse me, is governance. I mean, that's huge. Like, how are you going to actually manage this thing after the fact?
And you guys speak to kind of champions in the business to help support that. And that really leads to the next subject I want to get into, which is scaled analytics and AI. So we talk about kind of pilot purgatory as that 0 point to the point where companies are stuck at. Now I want to fast forward to that 100 point where it is the teams have basically scaled analytics across the organization. And I think one thing that's really important to emphasize with this is that there is no like industry-wide defined finish line or done when it comes to scaled analytics and AI. So that's where I'd ask you guys to speak to kind of what you've seen in terms of companies along that journey. What's the most scaled analytics and AI that you've seen in your experience? And just as kind of feedback so far, you guys are doing awesome at speaking to tactical kind of things that our attendees can go and do next week, which is super valuable. So thank you for speaking to kind of that level of detail. Wesley, I'll throw it over to you first. Curious about your experience at current or prior companies along this journey getting towards scaled analytics and AI, and really things that stood out to you as unique or valuable.
So, okay, let's hit the word scaled. So if I'm doing it inside my data center, I have boundaries. I have a capital expense that did it. And if I've missed it, then I've got some ramifications for that, right? So I've got to have a capital expenditure. I've got to go through a lot of rigmarole, and it takes quite a while to go get new equipment. So that's kind of one thought, and the reason why you just don't do it like that. I put it up in the cloud, and I don't care. When I'm developing it in today's way of doing things, I'm developing it in a way that it automatically scales. I'm using the principles of and architectures that once I put it up there, I can automatically scale this thing. So I'm not worried about scaling anymore. That's really if I just adhere to a few cloud principles, and I'm good to go. If I made some correct choices on the way that I architected it, if I thought about the data, if I thought about thoughtfully how I would scale this up in the beginning, and everything you do, you need to just act like it's going to be a massive success, and just make that in just the way you do it. I mean, it costs the same amount of agony and pain and cost to do it poorly as it does to do it well. So number one, you eliminate that whole conversation by acting and architecting it for massive scalability right off the bat. There's no penalty. If there is, it's very, very slight. So that's kind of number one. Number two, it's the only responsible thing, because you really don't know if this is going to be a hit or not. Because rarely do you really conceive of all the value that this is going to have. And the minute you get something that takes, you want to ride that moment, because that's the time to do it, to seize the moment. You also don't know how you can morph this great idea to be even a 10 times greater idea. And you want to take it, because if it's something to the consumer, they may use it completely differently than the way you thought they would. And you want to go with their idea. Ooh, I like this. And they're using it that way. You're not going to say, no. I did not think it would be used like that. Don't do it like that. This is my concept. Well, that sounds pretty stupid. They want to use it for putting makeup on, then do it that way. Just say, yeah, this is great. Add that to your commercial and go for it. However they want to do it, you just continue on. So I always scale for massive success, and that's the way we design it. Number two, what's the biggest one that I've seen? Well, Noelle's obviously going to win that battle with all the things that she's done. So I'm certainly not going to go for size here. But I worked for IBM for 18 years prior to coming to Kroger. Part of my duties there was, besides doing the consulting side, I was the deputy CTO for U.S. Federal and for National Security and Defense. So we worked on the really hard problems. One of the largest implementations when I worked with the IBM teams, I managed them to stand up U.S. Cybercom. Now, worked with General Alexander to go do that. That would be a very large scale set of analytics. That would be a large scale use of AI. So number one message is, you know what? AI is not a new thing. It's been out there for a while. So why are we scared of it? Because it's been out there for quite a while. It's not all that much different right now than it was then. It's just that it's a lot more acceptable. It's got some easier tools. It's got a lot more enablers, and everybody's got it in their cloud. But if we think about its availability, it's not that much different than it was then. We took Watson and we put it right to work. So how can it scale? Well, I'll tell you what, it scaled all over the internet. It scaled up in some of the largest applications for let's see how to put that. If I thought about it from a commercial term, there's probably no larger commercial application that is in use today than is in use there for citizenry advantage and protection. So my point is that it's got a long way to go. It's got lots of breathing room. We can do so much more. We can have layered AI. We've already determined how to give AI a version of ethics, how to give AI a version of commander's intent. We've determined how to have a set of hierarchies so AI can manage other AIs. We've done all those things already. Commercial's got lots of abilities to really become very agile. So there's lots of room to grow. We're thinking through the terms of ethics and responsible AI. We're thinking how to take the bias out of the training models. And there's lots of things that we're growing and making that to where it is a phenomenal capability. So with some of the capabilities that Noelle touched on in a prior discussion, it makes it to where it's responsible, it's dependable, and it's scalable to do a ton of things to help bring our goods to us reliably, to bring costs down significantly, and to free the human up. This is, to me, the most important point. Bring the human to where we start focusing on the problems that we're best to solve, and take this repetitive stuff and these decisions that need to be made very quickly and put them in the hands of AI that will do that, in the hands of machines that they're better constructed for. Let us go for the problems that our brains are best constructed to do, and give the other stuff that we would find tedious off to some other machines. And I'm gonna kick it over to Noelle because I bet she's going to amaze us in just a minute. Over to you.
No, that was awesome. Because and it's cool. Like, we're like family. You're at IBM. I did not know that. So that's awesome. I'm like, I have to go LinkedIn stalk you now and become friends. But one of the things, there are so many pieces of that echo kind of my big challenges. But I kind of want to take maybe a step back and start with the problem. One of the things that I got very excited about when I got into AI and realized what it could do was like this dream, right? And what you just said, like improving the ingenuity of a human, getting humans, like no team was ever like worried or upset when I came in to help, right? Like they were literally cried like tears of joy that they would not have to answer 400 emails because we built, a chat service to actually handle those emails for them. The same questions over and over, right? Like no one in, legal ever complained when we built a computer vision service to do contract analysis to find things when they need it. Like, they're not like, oh my gosh, I'm not gonna have a job. They're like, thank goodness this exists, right? So I think that's definitely a huge part of like, when we start scaling these solutions, in my mind, when I think about scale, it's like most of the time when I got involved, we would be doing these like pinpointed solutions, right? I'd be going into a part of the organization, giving them a little bit of AI and being like, your life will be really good. But the rest of the business didn't even know that was happening. And so to back up though, in order for people to, be able to take advantage of the dream of AI and this ingenuity that comes with it, you actually have to have an environment where and it sounds like Wesley, you have done this work at Kroger, which is, and actually I know a little bit about it just from history here. and the cloud providers that you use, which I am friends with. But in the beginning, or actually right now, most customers, most people, their data is not in a way that can be used by AI holistically, right? I can't go in as a marketer and be able to leverage data from engineering, finance, procurement. Like I can't see all their data and be able to make better decisions in my group because I have access to their insights. So a lot of the work I'm doing today is going into organizations and really like I'm selling the dream of AI. I call it AI-led transformation. Like I sell the dream of like, hey, you could do all this stuff. And then I look at their architecture and go, but you have to do all the stuff that Wesley just talked about, right? You actually have to, and you say it so easily and with like a smile. But many times this is the hard part for companies where they're like, wait, we have 29 disparate data systems, right? And data sources. We have 3 different ERPs, and some of them came through acquisition, so we don't even know what's in there, right? Like we have all of these things that none of it talks to each other. And so like 60% of my work is, yes, I sell the dream of AI, and then I go back and go, okay, we're going to spend the next 2 years modernizing your infrastructure, your data. So, and we call these terms like data lake. I think someone was talking about this, oftentimes like people, yes, data lake projects and pilots, they're one of the hardest types of pilots because the dream that's sold in that pilot is everything will talk to each other. And it takes years, not 3 days, which is sometimes what in a sales conversation, I've heard people say this. I've heard them write checks that are impossible to cash by an engineering team where they're like, oh yeah, we could get this set up in a week, 2 weeks tops. And I'm like, that is a 6-month discovery process, right? Like, granted, I'm in consulting, so I know what that work looks like. You do too, Wesley, right? Like, it takes time. And of course, we're in this instant gratification world, so we don't want to spend that time. But those pilots can work. But it goes back to what we said at the beginning, right? You have to be first a champion that sets the appropriate expectations for what you can do in a 2-week or 1-month period. You might just connect 2 data sources together and create a reference architecture for the rest of your organization. But that is the hard part, right? Once your data is good, then you can leverage AI. But most organizations, I was part of this for the last 25 years, I've convinced companies over and over again, store everything in the cloud. It's cheap. You can even, it's like, just put it up there and some magical unicorn called a data scientist will make sense of it one day. And now we're here. And there's not enough data scientists to go around. So what do we have to start leveraging our own technology to pull those insights. But you can't do it until you figure out how your data is going to connect to each other. So we call it like data mesh. It's not a product, it's like an idea, right? This data mesh concept. But that's the critical piece. You have to figure out as an enterprise, how does all of my lines of business who all have their own data sets, how do we collect them together and then make them accessible to applications, which means operationalizing them, turning them into APIs. Everything is code, right? Infrastructure is code, data as a service, right? Machine learning even as a service, everything's exposed as a couple lines of code. And then let your engineers, your app developers, lucky for us, who have been doing this for decades, now can just leverage all those data pieces to create a new story. But that's, like I said, that's the hard part. The dream of AI is easy to sell, like improving the ingenuity. People are like, yeah, come in, give it to me. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, you're like 5 years away from that, right? Because you have 40 systems and 2 of them know how to talk to each other. And the rest are, some of them are sitting on a mainframe and there's no way to even build an API for those. I mean, like the solutions are complex. But to your point, Wesley, like then you build the roadmap and you do the work and then you get there. And on the other side is like the gloriousness of acceleration. And, you don't end up becoming like a, Blockbuster or Kodak, right? You end up becoming a leader in your field, showing people, like I was just working with L'Oreal and I saw that they did this really cool data transformation and they exposed it. They like went and did a Forbes article about it. And they were like, look, you could do this. And L'Oreal is, as you know, an older company. Not as old as IBM, but they had old tech that they had to rebuild and reimagine and connect. We're right back to where we were in like I don't know, 2001, where enterprise integration is our story. But now, rather than enterprise integration, which was all about breaking up code, now we're fusing data, and data is the oil of the new world. So much of what you said, I totally, 100% agree with. It's a struggle, but that data modernization is often where companies kind of skip that part to get to the AI, and they wonder why the AI doesn't return on its investment. And I'm like, let's just like take a step back. I love AI, but let's talk about how can I get the data for those models? Oh, I can't. Those systems are locked down. That system's 25 years old. That system, everyone quit and no one knows how to access it anymore. Right? Like these are real issues that companies deal with. But that's why, I mean, it is solvable. You can do it. It just takes a team of people, whether you curate that team in-house or hire that team in to sit down, evaluate what you've got, and then start pulling the pieces together.
And that was the next subject I want to dive into, which is the tactics to get there that you guys have seen. And we could categorize it as people, process, and tech. Oftentimes companies start with the tech side of things and then try to figure out the processes and the people side. But Noelle, I love that you use the term operationalize, really, when you're talking about how to really roll it out across people and processes. And really, from your experience, Noelle, what stands out to you as a successful or unique approach to the people aspect of analytics and AI, either from a recruiting or an alignment and management standpoint once they're inside?
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm like, did I pay you to say that? Ask me this question. This is like one of the things I'm super passionate about. I call it inclusive engineering, and I don't just mean like gender or ethnicity, but like really shifting your organizational structure to not work in a silo. And this is what I meant earlier about the lines of businesses, right? Involving, it's not like engineering and everyone else, right? Like it's blending these lines, because that's where, in my experience, magic has happened. But to your point around people and process, really, they go pretty much together, right? Because the people do it and then we document it and it becomes a process. But one of the things, and I kind of have a shirt that says it right now, one of the things that I'm very passionate about, I actually went from IBM in the early 2000s to Red Hat, which is our enterprise open source, right, company, poster child of an enterprise open source company. And what I learned there, and what they actually open source to this day, they make available to everyone, is this concept of open communication within an organization about, again, blurring the lines between engineering and product, blurring the lines between engineering, product, and the lines of businesses that need that work. And when I say blurring the lines, I simply mean that we create, it kind of blurs, maybe not the best use of the word, because really it's about creating transparency. And here's the good news is that if you are a leader, what I call a mindful leader, like a leader who's intentional, a leader who sets clear goals, a leader who communicates well, right? This world of an open communication, it's almost like walking into an office and instead of everyone being in tall cubes, it's an open floor plan. Some of you might know this, but some people are super uncomfortable with the open floor. They're like, what? Like I can see people? I don't want to see anybody. Well, oftentimes our enterprise architecture is this way too, right? We're like, there's certain people who are like, I do my thing, you send me the ticket, I do it, I send it back. But in those environments, it takes forever, number one, and it's error prone. So as you were talking about operationalizing, like in order to operationalize something, you have to really embody the concept of agility. And agile, right, it used to be very trendy and people were like, oh yeah, I'm agile, and not really understand the meaning of the term. But it goes directly to the people and process, right? Agile is not a tech, it's not a stack, it's not a cloud vendor, right? Agile is the way, the mindset of a set of individuals within a company, but then applying processes that allow them to be nimble in the way they do their work. And I'll just give you a quick example of what I've seen be successful, like at Amazon. At Amazon, what they would do for this agility, especially in data science, is they'd build fully autonomous teams. No more than, we called them 2 pizza teams, no more than 2 pizzas could feed, right? So 7 to 8, I mean, I guess it depends on the person, right? But 7 to 8 people, but fully autonomous, which meant we needed to have someone who was in charge of the pipeline, someone who was in charge of, right, the GitHub merges, someone who had expertise in all these different, and that's what I mean by inclusive engineering, is that you create these holistic teams. And the good news about that is that they don't need to wait on anyone. they can pretty much do a certain scope of work all the way through and do it every day. I always like to tell you or remind people, when you go to like Amazon's website, there's over 200 web services on that website, all of them built by completely separate little autonomous pizza teams, and none of them talk to each other. The only time they talk, and they don't talk, but the only time they come together is in the merges when that stuff goes to production, and it goes to production 60 times a day. Like what would happen to your company if you could release new features to your customers 60 times a day? Like it's velocity we can hardly even wrap our heads around, but it's possible if you create the processes around it, but more importantly, people who will embrace this idea. Because let's face it, a lot of us have been in tech for a long time, and that's just not waterfalls how we did it before. We were like, okay, I just sent a ticket to, the DNS team. In 2 weeks, they're going to get back to me. So I'll go do this other thing. And we were just used to waiting. I remember even the technology, I would start up a piece of software and it would take 25 minutes to start. So I'm like, start, and I'd go talk to someone. I mean, we weren't super efficient in those days, but that's all changed if you choose to kind of adopt this new mindset. So I think agile is maybe the moral of the story, but it also is in identifying a persona, a leadership capability for people who actually understand what that means, but then create space for it within their teams, because it means hiring people of different skills. And guess what? When you create an autonomous team of all different people that think differently, do different stuff, right? You have a DevOps engineer, you have a app developer, you have a data scientist, right? You have all of these people. The funny thing is they don't seem to get along in meetings. It seems contentious all the time, but contentious, it's not, because of course, and if you're a leader who can, facilitate these conversations, like you never want everyone looking around and be like, yeah, that's a great idea, right? That's when Wall Street Journal is like, ooh, what's going to happen with that model, right? Like you don't want people agreeing. You want people to be like, wait, I know you said that, but what about this? Have you thought about that, right? They're constantly kind of picking each other apart, but again, in the spirit of agileness, and when they know they're there intentionally to build this inclusive group, there's just a magic that happens where the chemistry is much more healthy. It's very familial, right? Like, I don't know if you have siblings, but like I could fight with my brother and then like 10 seconds later be like, hey, let's go get a drink, right? Like
Healthy
you
tension.
don't hold on to it because you know it's part of the process, but you have to build that family feeling, right? You have to build that. And so a lot of the agile principles and methodologies and mindset kind of come into that. That actually goes to the question Beverly had actually asked around, like, you need like a champion, and like, who are these people? And honestly, they end up being someone like us who understands what we used to do, so we can empathize with the the legacy people in our organization who are less likely to change, but then also have a growth mindset that can lean into this agile way of working, and be a proponent and be an advocate for like, hey, this actually works. And it's like, I always say it's like test-driven development, right? Most people are like, test-driven development takes like twice as long. I'm never going to do that. Why? But then you do it once and you never go back. Like, you're like, oh my gosh, why didn't I do this before? This is my new way of doing it. Like, you become an advocate for it. So I think that's kind of part of it as well.
Well,
so anyway, yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Very well put. And same question for you, Wesley, from a cultural standpoint, especially convincing business stakeholders to invest. What have you seen from a unique or valuable kind of position?
Well, if you take what Noelle just talked about, she talked about the team dynamics on the developer end and how best those teams interact and innovate. Let me go take to the other side then of that comment. That is, how do you get the upper level support? So for me, the best way to go do this is to just think through how those business leaders are thinking. Many companies have got seniors that have been there for quite some time. A new trend is to get folks that aren't in that industry to come in. So that's a little bit of a different model. But for the most part, the people that are running the show have been in that industry for quite some time. So when you have that, they have got tremendous expertise in that industry. Now that's quite a strength, but that's also a weakness too, in that they tend to use all that experience, all that gut that they have. And I think if you have 10 stores, we'll say, that gut instinct is wonderful. But when does that instinct not work? Maybe if it is in one state, it might work because you've got a homogeneous customer set. But somewhere around so many states and so many stores over one continent or two, that gut instinct is not going to help you. It becomes quite a derailment factor, and you have to go to data. So when you have a whole bunch of data, then what is the technique that works out for you? It's being able to read the data. So now you need to put on that Swami hat and just kind of go like this over the data. Excuse me. So who are those people? Well, it's all the ones she's just been talking about. And so how do I relate to those people? How do I make that capability and that skill come to life? Well, it's first and foremost making the understanding and the belief and really accepting the fact that I'm better off with data. I'm better off with insight. And then coming to the realization, I'm better off with insight faster than my competitors have. And then you just say, if I'm talking to try and make that point, I'll always bring up Amazon, because the businesses they go into, they typically don't have almost no experience in whatsoever. You normally field the question, yeah, but they don't have to actually be profitable in anything that they do. Well, that is a benefit, and they normally don't. And in the beginning, what are they doing? They're collecting data. They're collecting understanding. They're building up the processes. They're building up the cache of understanding and knowledge and building the infrastructure. So, hey, wait a minute, you have quite an advantage. You already have infrastructure. You already have data. What's the difference? Well, they can tap the data, and they've got the information infrastructure, not just the physical infrastructure that you have. So you want to win? Well, you're going to have to be able to get your insight quicker. Use the natural advantages that you already have. What do you not have? What you don't have is an understanding, really, of the information structure, the IT components, the belief that you really need this data, and the techniques of depending on the data. So what's the one thing that you have to do as your number one priority? And this is how you understand if they got it. So this is your litmus test. If they come back and say, well, I think I need me some more of this, or I need me some more of that, and any of that, this or that is different than I need to fix my data program, then you know they don't have it, because the data program is not going to be set up for success. So what's the uniqueness of a program set up for success? You know you've won the fight. You know you've won the war. You know you've won everything, and now you're on the road to success when you have two things that are present. Number one, when you have an attitude that, okay, we are going to have to go get this data in its beginnings, in the very germination of the birth of a piece of data. I've got to get it cleaned up so that it is going to give me insight immediately. So I've got to then swallow the fact that all the rest of the data I have down there does not, and I've got to go clean that up. And this is going to be a tough job, and we've got to get all hands on deck and get all this data fit for use and change the ecosystem and every feeder system and all this horrible, terrible work. And guess what? Initially, it has no ROI. Oh my gosh. I can't attach gazillions of dollars to its initial cleanup and so forth, although it has to have additional zillions of dollars in what comes down after you get it all cleaned up and your additional business decisions and so forth that you do. There's not a real ROI that happens in the fact that you cleaned it up. The ROI is what happens when you then take all this insight and you exploit it. But you really got to get the cleanup dollars, and it's typically expensive, and it runs and busies up a whole bunch of people so that they're not working on projects that have a ROI, but you'll lose the war. So that's one. Number two, that is that they're going to go clean this thing up and get those systems ready to go. And then number two, you know you've won when you go and you look at the data. The attitude is, oh, I've got to go collect data 1, 2, and 3. I need to go look and see what else is there because I may want to analyze it later. Oh, I'm collecting more data than I needed because it was there. Oh, I got everything that was there because I may find a way to use it. Yes, and I'm going to make it contextually relevant. Oh, that's going to be a core value of mine. I'm going to go get all the data that I could possibly observe, and I'm going to go contextually enrich it right then and right there because it probably has a future value. Oh, wow. Yes, you're right. If I'm a customer company, everything I know about that customer leads into enhancing the customer experience. And that's the thing that I need to obsess about, the customer experience. I may not know how this moment, all that data is going to enhance the customer experience, but it will come to me later on. And the fact that I have it, somebody in my organization is going to figure it out. And it's probably not the person that maybe knows my business the best. It's going to come from someone else that's in an airline industry, a petrochemical industry, a manufacturing industry, something that's totally unrelated that sees the problem completely differently than I do and has a different notion of what customer value is. In R&D, we have every business you could possibly think of, every industry represented, every hard science and soft science represented, and they argue all the time. But it's respectful argument. And so when we give them the same task, they never agree. One of the tasks that we gave them was to design a shopping bag. What's the shopping bag of the future? You would never believe what came out. Wow. Oh my goodness. It was wild and crazy stuff, all from different perspectives. You know what? Each point of view had a different perspective they were coming from, envisioned a different future. Now, how do you use that? How do you use all that different information? Well, you go look at the underlying technology for each one of those, and you say, well, how different is that underlying technology? So if I look at that, isn't the technology for this, this, and this, and this, underlying technology, the enabling technology is pretty much the same. So if I go down this direction, I can pivot here, there, and I'm good. So you start looking about how do you eliminate the risks to give you the agility to pivot here, there, and yonder. What you don't want to do is rechange your underlying foundational technologies. You just want to go change the way that you exploit it for the experience. So coming back to your question, you go and you explain these potentials of what data can do and the value of what understanding insight does so that your executives understand and support the thesis that I'm going to run this business through the data and the insight. That typically then changes the way that the organizational model, the way that the various businesses relate to each other are re-engineered. When that re-engineering occurs, that then instantiates the type of business support that's necessary in the business leaders re-engineering their point of view and their education and the way they maybe promote up, that then reinforces that. So bottom line is, you got to have it at the top. Mm-hmm. They got to look at it in the same way that reinforces then the rest of the technology and the way that that Noelle was talking about it. That is the funding that's going to be necessary to get that kind of team, those kind of structures, in the way that she just beautifully laid it all out. You get those together, that organization is going to win because they're going to think about technology in the way that allows it to be agile, allows it to shift and move and shape to all these other unknown things. They can absorb it. They can change. They can be the constantly innovating and reinventing themselves type of organization. I think you put those two together, I think then you've got that perfect recipe for an organization that'll survive and be that 100-year organization without dying like so many of them have.
Very well put. And I think talking about from the top down as well as from the bottom up is really, I think, that differentiator that helps organizations. And we're going to throw it over to any questions that are in the chat Q&A. Noelle, I see you're already answering questions out there in the Q&A. Thank you so much. That helps.
Trying to help out.
Reagan, wanted to ask you as my co-moderator, are there any other questions in the chat from the audience that have been unanswered so far?
And I think this is a really great question. There's a couple of folks that were asking questions around having a champion for the technology and perhaps somebody in leadership to help it actually transition from a pilot to an enterprise-wide program. I hear this question literally all the time in webinars that I've been a part of. How do you make that shift at a leadership level to actually take this seriously? Like everything you're saying, you know, how do you get that champion to move it into something that is formally supported?
Let me take first shot at that, because that's what I'm in my 1819 lab right now. That's what I was doing this morning. So we had executives come in and I walked them through in a very small group, all in one business area, large business area. We were walking them through one innovation after another, after another, after another, educating them on how we do the innovation, how it all applies to their business area, what we had done specifically for their area, but then other innovations that we've done in other areas, and then how that could be applied to there. So what we're doing is just telling them, this is how we work. This is the successes that we've had in your area and others. And this is how it can be reapplied to yours. And this is what can allow us to have greater impact to yours. And then just sit there and answer their questions. So taking the time to letting them see how the secret sauce is made, how that sausage is constructed, what is possible, and letting that ideation happen. Now, that's method one. The other thing that we're doing is I'm closing one of my labs that's in a technology center that is full of geeks and wonderful people just like ourselves that we feel so comfortable with. And we're moving it downtown inside of our geo headquarters. And we're relabeling that an innovation and ideation center. So I'm hooking it up with every other lab I have and saying, here's the technologies that we have. This is where we see it going. So it's a innovation site and it's an ideation site. So here's what is possible in the examples of it, visually, photorealistic. We have NVIDIA as a partner. We've got IBM as a partner. We have Google as a partner. We have Amazon as a partner. Excuse me, not Amazon. We have Microsoft as a partner. And we're showing what we can bring to bear. And then we're bringing executives in and say, let me hook up every lab. And once you tell us what your problem is, and let's talk about how you can solve this. That's the other one. You bring it to them at the level that they can visualize what's going on in photorealistic way with digital twin is the way we'll be doing that.
Yeah, just to add to that, the technique I have used with organizations kind of globally is that we do just what you did. We go in and I first start with the board or the senior executives, right? C-level executives, and I paint the picture of what's possible. It's literally called the art of the possible is the session. And it gets everyone bought in, and it's not a sales conversation. It's not a product sale. It's just, excuse me, this is what is possible in your industry. Sorry. And I think the biggest thing around that, sorry, I don't know what just happened. All right, I have to cough.
Bless you. Yeah, no worries. No, you talk about just bringing in different leaders and really showing them visually what's possible. I think starting with that, it's kind of a roadshow in a sense, as you spoke to. And
they've got to see themselves inside of what you're talking about.
yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Very well put. Very well put. And on that point, want to talk to you about, because I know we're just coming up on 5 minutes remaining. Open question for both of you. And we can start with you, Wesley. Mm-hmm. What's next? What gets you excited about what Kroger's working on or what's happening in the industry related to analytics and AI, as well as if you have anything that you'd like to put around what you're working on next?
Oh, I'm terribly closed-minded and don't really like to share. But what do I like about it? It's our ability to make things in real time. So where we're going is understanding how to take that customer experience and then really start taking the things that irritate the shopper and just take them away. So we're taking those digital properties and those physical properties and just blending them together so it's just a seamless experience. Make it to where that customer just doesn't have to worry about what they are, where they are, what they're doing. They can buy anything, anywhere, anytime, get it sent to the house, carry out, doesn't really matter. And expanding that experience to more and more and more goods that they want to get. But the key to me is that we're taking the learnings that we get and we're able to get them in real time now and apply that learning across the country to a specific store, to a specific geography, understand the reach that learning has and immediately apply it. So data science in line, in a loop, happening in real time. The analytics inline, in a loop, happening in real time. Models being updated in real time, data informed, everything hyper personalized. That's where we're going, and we're going there as fast as we can. I'll kick that over to Noelle.
Yeah, that's
Maybe.
very exciting.
We'll see.
Yeah,
I lost my
Noelle.
voice earlier this week, so it's just like a mess, but hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, coming through clear.
So what I was just gonna really recap on it, and then I'll touch back on the last piece, was this process that we used. So we went in, we did this like executive overview, and then the magic really didn't happen there. They got excited. Of course, I foster excitement, so that's my job. I get them excited, and they're like, who can I bring, from my teams respectively across the org? And we have this thing called an innovation day, which is exactly what I think you're talking about, Wesley, where we bring in all the tech, and it's one step beyond like the visualization, the PowerPoint, right? Of like, here's what's possible. The other thing, we're very focused on use case, right? So if you're in finance, we're talking about like propensity models, and we're talking about very specific problems that organization has, and then showing them like AI can solve it in this way. And then the magic though happens when we carry that down to, and I think someone was asking or commented or asking a question about this, but carrying it down to the tech people, and we like literally get them in the same room. And I've done this at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I've done it at Abbey Road for art, for music, where we brought in like the domain experts in the business and combined them with data scientists and said, just like you said, Wesley, right? What are your problems? And let's just play and like pretend that we know how to solve it and see what we can do in 2 days and give them a hackathon. And then here's the fun part of a hackathon, right? Is we did this at a big insurance company, hugely successful, where we brought in all the executives, and the executives judged all these projects. They literally pitched, here's an AI idea. And there was no, like, it wasn't a hugely engineering process. It was very much just like getting the company excited and everyone thinking about what they could do. And those then, rather than becoming pilots and getting stuck in pilot purgatory, became organizationally bought in. Like everyone was like, oh my gosh, that would be so cool if we do this thing. And that energy shifts it from like hard pitching, getting funding, right? It's not that avenue anymore. Now the whole company is excited and they get awards. And, we even used to give out this big white shoe called the Just Do It Award for people who implemented the fastest in a hackathon. So you'd get a Nike sneaker to have on your desk, right? Like it's this type of excitement, I think, that's necessary. It's combining the technologists with those that have the problem and getting them to talk, but starting at the top, executives, and working your way down. I always say boardroom to whiteboard to keyboard, and maybe even to the classroom, the chalkboard, right? How do we get them all kind of excited about the same thing and working together?
Very well put, both of you. And time has flown by.
Yes, I know. Sorry about that.
Thank you. No, so much insight, especially on the people and the change management side. And even you spoke to, Noelle, the education side and how important that is as well. Just want to wrap up. Thank you both so very much for joining today. Anybody on the call, any of the attendees today, we'll be sending out a recording of this webinar as well as more information if you're interested. And of course, if you'd like to be involved in future webinars, as well as just want to talk to us at Iconos and understand how we can potentially help you out, reach out to us, iconos.ai, or go ahead and shoot us an email as well. Noelle, Wesley, thank you both very much for your time today. I appreciate you joining.
Thank you much.
Awesome. Nice to meet you, Wesley.
I'm going over to your LinkedIn.
Thanks, everybody. This was so fun. And thanks to everyone who communicated in the chat those questions. Like, it makes all the difference. It helps keep it really exciting. So really fun. Thank you for having us.
Great. Okay. So with that, we'll wrap up. Thank you, everybody.